The horses broke first, as Persian war elephants emerged through the dust near Al-Qadisiyyah. Entire sections of the Muslim cavalry suddenly collapsed backward in panic. Men were thrown from saddles. Spears vanished beneath giant feet. Horses screamed and twisted away from the battlefield as armored elephants pushed forward through smoke, heat, and flying arrows. And within minutes, parts of the Muslim army were already falling apart. Across the plains stood the Sasanian Persian Empire, one of the most powerful empires on earth. And behind its advancing lines moved war elephants built to terrify entire armies before battles were even won. Some historical traditions claim nearly 30,000 Muslim soldiers faced a Persian force possibly twice their size. And on the first day of battle, it looked hopeless. Dust erased the battlefield. Messengers disappeared into smoke. Wounded soldiers crawled back through the sand while Persian drums thundered across the plains. Then the situation became even worse. The Muslim commander, Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, was so sick he could barely stand. Unable to fight on horseback, he watched the battle from an elevated position while runners carried his commands through collapsing formations below. And as the elephants continued advancing, many soldiers believed the battle was already lost. But 4 days later, the Persian army itself would collapse into chaos. Its commander would die. Its formations would disintegrate. And one of the oldest empires in the world would begin dying on the plains of Iraq. Because Al-Qadisiyyah was not simply a battle. It was the moment one world began collapsing, and another began rising from the desert. Long before the battle began, both sides already understood this war could change history. After the death of Muhammad in 632 CE, the Rashidun Caliphate rapidly unified Arabia under the leadership of Abu Bakr and later Umar ibn al-Khattab. What had once been divided tribal territory was now becoming a united military force, and after securing Arabia, Muslim armies began moving north into Iraq and the lands controlled by the Persian Empire. But Persia was no longer the unstoppable superpower it had once been. Years of brutal war against the Byzantine Empire had exhausted the Sasanians. Entire regions had been devastated. Huge numbers of soldiers had already died in earlier conflicts. The empire suffered assassinations, political conspiracies, civil wars, and constant instability inside the royal court. Kings rose and disappeared rapidly. Nobles fought each other for influence. And while Persia struggled to hold itself together, Arab armies kept pushing deeper into Iraq. Earlier Muslim commanders like Khalid ibn al-Walid and al-Mutanna ibn Harida had already launched dangerous campaigns into Persian territory before Al-Qadisiyyah. The Persians knew exactly what this battle meant. If they failed here, the road into the heart of the empire could open permanently. So both sides began gathering for a decisive confrontation. From Medina and across Arabia, tribal contingents moved north toward Iraq. Veterans of earlier campaigns joined the army. Cavalry units crossed desert roads beneath extreme heat. Camels carried supplies through open terrain. Infantry marched for days through dust and exhaustion before even reaching the battlefield. The supreme commander of the Muslim army was Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, one of the most respected companions of Muhammad. Back in Medina, Caliph Umar closely supervised the campaign through letters, messengers, and military reports. Some traditions even claim Umar originally wanted to personally lead the army himself before being convinced not to risk the caliphate in such a dangerous battle. The Muslim force likely numbered somewhere between 20,000 and 30,000 men, not a perfectly organized imperial army, not heavily standardized, but hardened veterans united by momentum, belief, survival, and battlefield experience. Some carried chainmail. Others wore lighter armor. Many fought with swords, spears, bows, and shields shaped by years of tribal warfare and earlier campaigns inside Iraq. But across the plains near Al-Qadisiyyah, another army was gathering. And this one looked like an empire. Persian banners stretched across the horizon. Heavy cavalry moved in organized formations. Armored horsemen prepared for shock attacks designed to break enemy lines apart. Archers assembled behind infantry ranks. Regional levies and noble warriors arrived from across the empire. And among them stood the most terrifying weapon on the battlefield, the elephants. Massive war animals trained for psychological destruction. Some carried armored crews. Others supported archers mounted high above the battlefield. For many Muslim horses, The smell alone caused panic before combat even started. And leading this enormous Persian army was one of the empire's most experienced commanders, Rostam Farrokhzad, a powerful Persian noble who understood the danger better than many around him. Unlike others in the Persian elite who underestimated the Arabs, Rostam reportedly knew this war could decide the future of Persia itself. But even before the battle began, something already felt wrong. The Persian Empire still looked powerful from the outside, but internally, it was exhausted, and Rostam knew it. When the two armies finally approached each other near Al-Qadisiyyah, the battlefield itself felt enormous. Open plains stretched toward the horizon, dry terrain mixed with canals and river systems. Dust moved constantly through the air beneath the burning heat. The environment favored cavalry movement and large army formations, but it also created confusion. Visibility constantly shifted. Formations disappeared behind clouds of dust, and every soldier on both sides understood something terrifying. Once the battle started, there would be no easy escape. Before combat began, negotiations were attempted several times between Muslim envoys and Persian leadership. One of the most famous envoys was Rib'i ibn Amir. Islamic traditions describe dramatic moments where Arab representatives in simple clothing entered Persian royal settings filled with luxury, silk, and imperial ceremony. The contrast became symbolic, an old empire facing a rising desert power. But negotiations failed. Neither side would retreat. War became inevitable. Still, Rostam delayed the battle. Again and again. Some Persian commanders wanted immediate action. Others argued over strategy and politics. But according to many traditions, Rostam himself hesitated deliberately. Maybe he hoped for reinforcements. Maybe he feared risking the empire's remaining strength. Or maybe he understood something others refused to accept. Persia was weaker than it looked, and across the battlefield, the Muslim army continued preparing. Soldiers repaired weapons. Archers checked arrows beneath the heat. Cavalry units repositioned near the flanks. Men prayed beside campfires while dust drifted through the night air. Many already knew the Persian army was larger. Some reports claimed overwhelming numbers. Others exaggerated the size even further. But on the battlefield itself, what terrified the Muslim soldiers most was not the numbers. It was the elephants. At night, some horses reportedly became restless simply from their scent. And as sunrise approached over Al-Qadisiyyah, both armies prepared for collision. Persian drums echoed across the plains. Armor reflected sunlight through the dust. Elephants moved slowly toward the front lines. Heavy cavalry assembled behind them. And inside the Muslim camp, Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas was suffering badly from illness. Pain spread through his body so severely that he struggled to move normally. Unable to lead directly from horseback, he established command from an elevated position overlooking the battlefield. From there, he watched thousands of soldiers preparing below. Messengers stood ready beside him. Orders would now travel through runners moving across one of the most dangerous battlefields in the ancient world. Then finally, the waiting ended. The Persians began advancing. The battlefield exploded into chaos almost immediately. As Persian drums thundered across the plains, the war elephants moved forward through the dust with armored troops advancing behind them. The ground itself seemed to shake. Muslim cavalry horses panicked instantly. Some reared backward before impact even happened. Others refused to move forward at all. Then the elephants hit the front lines. Massive animals smashed directly into formations while Persian archers fired from behind advancing infantry. The psychological effect was devastating. Horses screamed and broke formation. Men were crushed beneath feet and falling bodies. Dust swallowed entire sections of the battlefield as confusion spread from one unit to another. Behind the elephants, Persian heavy cavalry pushed forward aggressively, looking for openings inside collapsing Muslim lines. And for a moment, it looked like the Persian strategy was working perfectly. Entire sections of the Muslim army struggled to hold position. Some cavalry formations were forced backward. Others became separated in the dust and confusion. The elephants created gaps, and Persian attacks immediately exploited them. Above the battlefield, Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas watched the disaster unfolding from his elevated command position. Unable to fight personally because of illness, he relied completely on runners and messengers to control the army. Commands traveled slowly through chaos. One messenger disappeared into dust. Another returned wounded. Still the orders continued. Hold the line. Protect the flanks. Reorganize the cavalry. Do not break. Below him, exhausted soldiers fought desperately beneath the heat. Archers fired until their arms weakened. Infantry braced spears against advancing elephants. Cavalry attempted counterattacks only to watch terrified horses pull away again. And everywhere across the battlefield, the elephants kept moving. Some Muslim soldiers reportedly tried targeting the crews riding above them. Others attacked the animals directly with spears and arrows. But the psychological terror remained overwhelming. By afternoon, bodies already covered large parts of the battlefield. Wounded men crawled back toward camp, while replacement fighters moved forward through drifting dust and smoke. The heat became unbearable. Water grew difficult to reach. Exhausted horses shook beneath armored riders. Still the fighting continued, hour after hour. And yet, despite the chaos, despite the elephants, despite the larger Persian force, the Muslim army did not collapse. By nightfall, they were still standing, barely, but alive. And across the battlefield, Rostam realized something dangerous. The Arabs had survived the first day. Morning returned to Al-Qadisiyyah through smoke, dust, and exhaustion. Bodies still covered parts of the battlefield from the first day. Broken spears lay beside dead horses. Wounded soldiers who survived the night sat silently near campfires while others tightened armor with shaking hands before returning to the front lines again. Almost nobody had slept properly. And as sunlight slowly spread across the plains, the Persian army began preparing for another assault. Across the battlefield, the elephants appeared once more, huge silhouettes emerging through drifting dust. Their armored heads moved slowly above the formations while Persian infantry reorganized behind them. For many Muslim soldiers, the sight alone was enough to reopen the fear from the previous day, because everybody now understood the truth. As long as the elephants controlled the battlefield, the Persians controlled the battle. Inside the Muslim command position, Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas continued directing operations while suffering from severe illness. Messengers moved constantly up and down the structure carrying battlefield reports, Persian cavalry movements, flank pressure, arrow casualties, elephant positions, and slowly, a realization spread through the Muslim command. Do not fight the Persian army first. Destroy the elephants. That decision would change the entire battle. As the Persians advanced again, Muslim units began concentrating attacks directly against the elephants instead of the infantry surrounding them. Archers aimed toward the crews riding above the animals. Infantry moved dangerously close beneath massive feet, trying to strike vulnerable areas. Some accounts describe fighters targeting elephant eyes. Others cut harnesses or attacked the supporting crews guiding the animals through battle. The fighting became horrifyingly close. Dust swallowed visibility. Men disappeared beneath moving animals. Screams mixed with trumpet-like elephant cries echoing across the battlefield. Then finally, the Persian advantage began cracking. One wounded elephant suddenly lost control and turned backward into nearby Persian formations. Another panicked after repeated attacks from Muslim fighters surrounding its legs. The battlefield changed instantly. Persian infantry units struggled to maintain organization while massive animals crashed unpredictably through their own lines. Archers lost formation. Heavy cavalry hesitated. And for the first time since the battle started, the Muslim army felt momentum shifting. The cavalry that had panicked the previous day slowly began recovering confidence. Arab horsemen started moving aggressively along the flanks again. Fast cavalry groups launched repeated hit-and-run attacks against exposed Persian units. Dust clouds expanded across the battlefield as formations collided beneath extreme heat. Then more reinforcements reportedly arrived to strengthen Muslim morale further. Veterans from earlier campaigns moved into the fighting. Fresh soldiers entered exhausted frontline positions, and slowly, the Persian army began facing a problem far more dangerous than battlefield casualties: fatigue. Because unlike earlier imperial wars fought with overwhelming confidence, this battle refused to end quickly. By afternoon, the entire battlefield had become a grinding war of endurance. Men fought beneath unbearable heat. Wounded soldiers continued returning to the lines. Exhausted horses struggled to remain standing. Water became increasingly difficult to transport through active combat zones. Still, Rostam continued pushing the attack. Persian cavalry repeatedly attempted to regain momentum. Heavy infantry pressed against Muslim formations. Archers continued firing into crowded sections of the battlefield, but now every attack cost more energy. Every advance created more confusion. And the elephants, the terrifying monsters that nearly destroyed the Muslim army on the first day, were no longer invincible. By sunset, both armies were exhausted again. But psychologically, the battlefield had changed. The Persians had entered Al-Qadisiyyah expecting to crush a smaller force quickly. Instead, the battle was becoming a nightmare of attrition. And somewhere beneath the smoke and dust, the Persian Empire itself was beginning to bleed out. By the third day, Al-Qadisiyyah no longer looked like a battlefield. It looked like the end of a world. The plains were covered with corpses, shattered weapons, dead horses, broken armor, and exhausted men barely able to stand. The smell of blood mixed with dust beneath the brutal heat of Iraq. Water supplies were harder to reach. Medical treatment barely existed beyond basic survival. Some wounded soldiers returned to battle simply because there were not enough men left to replace them. And still, the fighting continued. Persian commanders attempted to reorganize weakened sections of the army, while Rostam tried desperately to stabilize battlefield momentum. Heavy cavalry repositioned again near vulnerable sectors. Archers moved behind damaged infantry formations. Remaining elephant units stayed farther back after the disasters of the second day. But exhaustion now controlled everything. Muslim soldiers collapsed from fatigue between clashes. Persian troops struggled to maintain formation discipline. Horses trembled beneath riders coated in dust and sweat. Entire units fought with reduced visibility because the battlefield air itself had become thick with smoke and dirt. Then night came. But the battle did not stop. What followed became legendary in Islamic historical tradition, Laylat al-Harar, the Night of Clamor. Darkness swallowed the battlefield while fighting continued almost non-stop across the plains. Fires burned through the night beside collapsing formations. Men shouted commands they could barely hear themselves. Steel crashed against shields somewhere inside the darkness. Wounded soldiers screamed for water. Loose horses ran wildly between bodies and broken equipment. Visibility became almost impossible. Some fighters reportedly struggled to identify friend from enemy inside the smoke and confusion. And across the battlefield, thousands of exhausted men kept fighting anyway. The psychological horror became unbearable. Many soldiers had now been fighting for days with almost no proper rest. Fear mixed with exhaustion until men moved almost automatically through survival instinct alone. Inside the Muslim command position, Sa'd continued receiving battlefield reports through exhausted messengers barely able to stand after crossing active combat zones. The fighting near the center was intensifying. Persian pressure continued near sections of the front. Cavalry units required repositioning again. Still, Sa'd kept sending orders back into the darkness. Hold the line. Rotate the front ranks. Protect the archers. Maintain pressure. Do not break. Meanwhile, Rostam faced growing disaster inside the Persian camp. The elephants had failed to secure victory. The battle was draining the empire's remaining strength. And despite superior numbers and equipment, the Muslim army still refused to collapse. For the Persians, that realization was becoming terrifying. Because Al-Qadisiyyah was no longer simply a battle. It was becoming a test of endurance the empire itself might not survive. Hour after hour, the Night of Clamor continued. Metal struck metal through darkness. Torches flickered beside wounded soldiers. Men fought half-blind beneath smoke and exhaustion. And somewhere across the battlefield, history itself was beginning to shift. By dawn of the fourth day, both armies were physically and psychologically shattered, but only one side was closer to collapse. When sunrise finally reached Al-Qadisiyyah on the fourth day, the battlefield looked broken. Dead soldiers covered the plains in every direction. The wounded lay beside canals and abandoned equipment. Dust moved across burned sections of the battlefield, while exhausted formations slowly reorganized for yet another day of fighting. But something inside the Persian army had changed. The confidence from the first day was gone. The elephants no longer controlled the battlefield. The heavy cavalry was exhausted. Communication between units had weakened. And after days of non-stop combat, Morale was beginning to collapse. The Muslim army sensed it. Across the battlefield, cavalry units started increasing pressure against weakened Persian sectors. Fast-moving attacks struck vulnerable positions before pulling away again. Infantry advanced more aggressively toward damaged formations. Persian troops still fought fiercely, but the battlefield no longer moved with imperial confidence. It moved with desperation. Inside the Persian command structure, Rostam attempted to stabilize the army before the situation became irreversible. Messengers moved through chaos carrying urgent orders. Reserve troops repositioned. Archers attempted to slow Muslim advances. But confusion was spreading faster than commands. Then came the moment that shattered everything. Accounts differ about the exact details. Some traditions describe violent winds and dust storms striking the battlefield during the chaos. Others describe collapsing equipment and confusion near the Persian command area. But most versions agree on one reality. Rostam Farrokhzad died during the collapse. Some stories claim he attempted escape near a river or supply area before being discovered and killed. Others describe soldiers scattering as Muslim forces pushed deeper through broken Persian formations. Whatever exactly happened, the effect was catastrophic. News spread rapidly across the battlefield. Rostam was dead, and with him, the psychological center of the Persian army died too. Panic exploded through sections of the Persian lines. Units began retreating without coordination. Some soldiers attempted crossing canals and waterways in desperation. Others abandoned positions entirely. Command structures collapsed into chaos. Muslim cavalry immediately exploited the retreat. Horsemen surged forward against fleeing formations while exhausted Persian troops struggled to reorganize under pressure. What followed became a disaster. Some Persian soldiers drowned trying to escape. Others were cut down during pursuit across open terrain. Equipment, animals, banners, and supply positions were abandoned in the confusion. And after 4 days of exhaustion, terror, dust, night fighting, collapsing morale, and battlefield horror, the Persian Empire lost Al-Qadisiyyah. But this was more than defeat. It was imperial trauma, because the empire could no longer replace losses like these easily. Too many soldiers were dead. Too many commanders were gone. Too much confidence had collapsed on the plains of Iraq, and the road toward the Persian heartland was now opening. After the battle ended, the silence across Al-Qadisiyyah must have felt unreal. For days earlier, the plains had been filled with drums, cavalry movement, war elephants, banners, and imperial confidence. Now the battlefield was covered with destruction. Bodies remained across the open terrain. Broken weapons disappeared beneath drifting dust. Wounded survivors searched through ruins of collapsed formations while exhausted soldiers tried to understand what had just happened. Because this battle changed far more than a frontier war. It changed the future of the Middle East. After the victory, Muslim forces advanced deeper into Persian territory toward Ctesiphon, the imperial capital of the Sasanian Empire. And when the city eventually fell, the shock spread across the ancient world. One of the greatest empires on earth was collapsing. Imperial treasures were seized. Political authority shattered. The image of Persian invincibility disappeared. Meanwhile, Yazdijerd III, the last Sasanian ruler, fled eastward, trying desperately to rebuild resistance. But the empire never fully recovered. More defeats followed. More territory disappeared, and slowly, the ancient Sasanian Empire began dying permanently. What makes Al-Qadisiyyah so important is not simply who won. It is what the battle represented. An exhausted old superpower, broken by years of war, internal division, and political collapse, facing a younger force united by momentum, leadership, belief, and expansion. The old Middle East was ending, and a new Islamic civilization was beginning to rise across Iraq, Persia, Syria, Egypt, and beyond. But what truly made Al-Qadisiyyah unforgettable was the human reality inside the battle itself. The elephants charging through dust, the horses panicking, the wounded crawling through darkness during the Night of Clamor. Rostam watching an empire begin collapsing around him, and Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, sick and unable to stand properly, still commanding the battle through messengers while history changed below him. Al-Qadisiyyah was not clean victory. It was exhaustion, fear, survival, chaos, and the violent collapse of an ancient world. Because sometimes history does not change slowly. Sometimes it changes in 4 days.